Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now today we're taking a look at this. This is the AMD X4 950 and it was one of the last processors to be released by AMD before the Ryzen lineup in early 2017. So the X4 950 here was actually released twice in a way. It first made an appearance in OEM machines around 2016 and then it became a retail processor after the Ryzens came out in 2017. So we're going for the first date for the whole idea of this video. Originally it was found as part of cheap systems that were okay for everyday usage and perhaps a little bit of light gaming. So today we're going to see what it can do in a few games, how well it holds up, and hopefully we can run a few of my favourites. So let's jump straight into the titles and see what this thing is actually capable of. Okay, so in Cyberpunk 2077, I'm using the medium preset, pretty much medium all around, including crowd density. We are running at 1920 by 1080, and we're using 16 gigs of DDR4, clocked at the maximum 2400 MHz that the CPU supports, as well as a 6700 XT. This is a pretty decent card when paired with a better processor, but I have a feeling it's going to be rather limited here. So let's jump into the gameplay, and I'm just going to be playing this game as I talk about what's happening on screen. Okay, so we've jumped into the game already. Not a brilliant start, hovering around 30 FPS. The biggest problem with this CPU isn't the average frame rate necessarily, but it is the stutter. If you take a look at the frame rate graph here, or the frame time graph I should say, you can see that it's pretty much all over the place, and this is what causes those nasty frame drops. There are a lot of drops below 30 here, 28, 27 there, 29. Let's just pull over here and see if we can get this frame rate up a little bit. Now I am sort of in the middle of nowhere on a highway here. I imagine that as we venture further into Night City, this frame rate's only going to get worse. 50 FPS or so here. The CPU is pretty much maxing out at 90 to 100% a lot of the time, and as you can tell by the usage of a 6700 XT, it really hasn't got that much to do. It is being held back or bottlenecked by the X4 950, which now is at 100% usage some of the time. And as we venture towards the city here, you can see the frame rate really suffering. So next up we have Crysis Remastered, and I always tend to stick with the low preset here because I find that the game looks pretty good even with these settings. You can of course turn it up if you wish, but here, jumping into the gameplay now, and the X4 950, well, it doesn't seem to be doing too bad. Crysis Remastered tends to run quite well on a wide range of systems, a lot better than it did when it first launched anyway. I think it's better at CPU utilization now. You can see that there are some spikes to around 90% and higher with the X4 950. Let's just take care of these enemies here and see what happens. Yeah, it's definitely dropping toward the mid 40s. The average is pretty good overall for this chip, but if you do find one of these on eBay and you also find a Ryzen 3 1200 for a similar price, then the 1200 is going to be the one to go for, definitely. That is going to be a lot better in games, as well as CPU intensive tasks like Cinebench R20, which I'll show you the result of at the end. So with Red Dead Redemption 2, I opted for Digital Foundry's console settings. I can't remember exactly what they're called. The game looks good, but it also runs fairly well. As you can see here, it is running better still than the console versions with higher than 30 FPS, but there are some drops toward the low 30s, and once again the CPU is hovering around 90 to 100% usage a lot of the time. The graphics card is hovering around 80% on occasion. It really doesn't have too much to do in this case, but overall the performance is okay. Now I wouldn't recommend pairing an X4 950 with something like a 6700 XT because it will be wasted potential in terms of the graphics card, but what I do is generally tend to pair these older CPUs with powerful graphics cards so that they are being utilised at their full potential. Okay, so Dirt 5 here, I've gone with the high preset. This, again, makes the game look pretty good. It's not the best looking game in the world anyway. Now, I have run Dirt 5 on far weaker hardware than this, far weaker CPUs, and it seems to do fine on a wide variety of components. If we jump into the race now, I've got my Aston Martin here today. I haven't done very well in my past few races, mainly because I'm focusing more on the benchmarking, but as you can see, the frame rate isn't too bad, 40 to 50 FPS a lot of the time. The CPU again is hovering around 80 to 90% usage most of the time. Sometimes this jumps up to around 90 to 95%. Let's try and get around here without crashing. There we go. And yeah, when we hit puddles, things like that, when there are more I was going to say enemies then, but when there are more cars on screen, the frame rate does tend to dip a little more, but for the most part, performance is acceptable. Now, Black Ops Cold War, I think it should run, but I couldn't get past the compiling shaders part here. It just got stuck at 0% for like an hour. I left this game open for an hour, and then I tried again for another hour, and it just wouldn't do anything. So yeah, I'm going to see if I can get this working, but if I were to play it like this, it would just be really laggy. So for GTA 5, I've used a mixture of high and very high settings. This is something that the 6700 XT is more than capable of handling. Unfortunately though, it is a pretty CPU intensive game, though I wouldn't call it that demanding, to be honest. In 2021 it can handle itself, or I should say that a lot of weaker processors can handle this game just fine. Even dual core chips, things like the G6400 and the G6405, a lot of older Pentiums too. Here though, the Athlon X4 950 seems to be struggling a little bit, and overall the frame times are a little bit all over the place. If we make our way down to the centre of Los Santos here, then the frame rate is hovering around 40 to 50 FPS once again. It's certainly playable, but there is a lot of wasted potential as far as the GPU is concerned, because the X4 950 certainly is holding us back. And I wouldn't really recommend pairing it with anything more powerful than, say, a 1060, to be quite honest, or an RX 570 from AMD. Okay, so for Assassin's Creed Valhalla, I decided to go with the high preset here. Again, this is something that the 6700 XT under normal circumstances should be able to handle absolutely fine. If we actually jump into the game though, you'll see once again that the processor is causing most of our problems. The usage wasn't quite so high here, 60 to 70% a lot of the time. This did jump up on occasion, and the game was certainly playable with at least 30 FPS, though if you do want 60 frames per second, then that's going to be pretty hard to achieve in a lot of titles with a chip like this one. The thing as well with the X4 950 is that it can be quite difficult to find, and when you can find it, it isn't the cheapest chip in the world. I bought this from CEX here in the UK for £32, I believe, and for similar money you can have an older but just as capable Core i5, which will probably produce some better frame times in certain titles as well. But there we go, the X4 950, one of the last CPUs to release before the Ryzens in early 2017. I hope you've enjoyed this video. It's nice to see that the X4 950 can still handle a lot of modern titles, but you will notice that the CPU usage will be pretty high. So yeah, if you can find one for like £10 or £20 or dollars, then by all means, it might be ideal for a cheap budget rig. But aside from that, yeah, it's all right. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like on it, leave a dislike if you didn't. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see you all in the next one.